Okay, Josie. Well, I mean, this has been a big story over the course of the weekend, hasn't it? We know the details now, but you've written this piece suggesting effectively that Jordan and Egypt are in a difficult position because of Donald Trump's suggestion. Why exactly do you say that? Why do you feel that?
So, I mean, as someone that's followed the region for a long time, I sort of understand the history of both countries' acceptance of Palestinian refugees over the decades. I mean, first off, it would be an economic disaster for either of them. On top of that, they also know that it would basically essentially kill any notion of a Palestinian statehood if they were to accept these people from Gaza. Um, both countries have already taken in millions of Palestinians over the decades, who have not been allowed to return home. So, but if Trump wants to get punitive, I mean, just like he did over the weekend with Colombia, it leaves them, as you say, between a rock and a hard place. The US is both Egypt and Jordan's third largest trading partner. So, I mean, if Trump were to pull a move like that, it would essentially cripple them.
Do you think that that is Donald Trump's plan? Do you think that this is the start of a negotiation that actually only ends one way, and that is Trump going, well, if you don't, then this? And what might this be?
What's kind of interesting is that this was not sort of official policy that was sent out in a statement. This was something that Trump essentially blurted out to a reporter on Air Force One after some pretty dogged questionings from that reporter about his call with King Abdullah of Jordan. So this wasn't a readout from either countries. This wasn't stated policy. This was something that he essentially just said off the cuff when he was pushed to talk about it. Um, I mean, Trump is a long-time ally of Israel's. He's also been heavily influenced by family members like Jared Kushner, who was his White House advisor in the first term, and obviously his son-in-law, um, and and members of his family have essentially suggested the cleansing of Gaza before. They've talked about this waterfront property in Gaza, and it would be a shame to go to a waste sort of thing. So it's very clear that this is something that he wants, perhaps even on a personal level. And this is something that Netanyahu himself has been pushing for, both privately and publicly, since the October 7th attacks. Essentially, a move to bring in settlers into Gaza. It was rejected behind closed doors by the Biden administration, and he's obviously finding um, an ear now to this plan.
If Donald Trump does insist and then threaten tariffs or something else that would impact
Mm.
Jordan and Egypt economically, are they so important? You mentioned third largest trade partner for each. Are they so important, those economic deals, that would make it inevitable that they are forced into taking Palestinians? And then, of course, that's quite apart from actually making it happen, but at least getting them to agree.
Um, I think, Jordan put out a statement. The foreign minister put out a statement shortly afterwards. Sisi was supposed to have talked to Trump yesterday. That's the president of Egypt, and I haven't read a readout from that yet. I mean, the Egyptian embassy to the US kind of posted an op-ed that it did in 2023 on this subject without issuing a new comment that was basically saying that this was unworkable. This was a totally unworkable deal. It would sort of doom them, and it would doom them economically. It would doom their standing in the region as a kind of supporter of the Palestinian cause. Um, for both of them, I mean, this is really an impossible position, and it's very difficult to know whether this isn't the first time that Trump has threatened something and maybe not gone through with it. Um, what you have this time, however, is a cabinet that he's assembled. If you look at Mike Huckabee, the Israel ambassador, you look at Lee Stefanik, who's now been appointed to the UN. I mean, he's surrounded himself by pro-Israel zealots that will help him essentially affect some of the things that he's now saying. So Egypt and Jordan might have to take the idea much more seriously than perhaps they had done under previous administrations. I mean, they've never come under any real pressure to take in what is 2 million Gazans, who they know will probably never be likely to return.
Is there anything those two countries could sort of hit back
Mm.
against Donald Trump with? I mean, I noticed there was mention of Saudi in your piece, wasn't there? That could they come to their aid? I mean, they rely on U.S. weaponry and defense systems, but I guess that must make America a lot of money, which I imagine Trump would want to keep. And the other, just thinking aloud, the other suggestion might be, could it, if they did decide, we can't in our right minds agree to this, but we still need defense, security, etc., might it push them closer to China?
I think, look, Saudi doesn't seem to have ever been closer to the US than it has now. Trump was saying for a long time over the last week that he wanted a call with Saudi's rulers to be the first call he makes, if it was not to Keir Starmer. Um, so Saudi is very, very close with the US right now. They've signed the Abraham Accords, which kind of normalizes their relationship with Israel. They stated that they're gonna make $600 billion dollars in investment and with US defense contracts in the next few years. So, I mean, this is a very serious partnership that is going to take a lot to shake. And they are kind of, historically being the kind of the Sunni powerhouse that supported the Palestinian cause, but we've seen that waning over the last couple of years. Um, I mean, you have a kind of a second option, I guess. I mean, if there isn't um, a deal to be done with Egypt and Jordan, and there will be a hell of a lot of pushback for this. And also, I mean, if you look at it in a kind of hard nosed way, I mean, America doesn't want to kind of hugely weakened main allies in the region. I mean, which is what it would do to both countries who have been relatively stable for a long time now. I mean, the idea that this could completely destabilize them is not beyond imagination. So, I mean, essentially, what could end up happening is that some Gazans are allowed to stay, a percentage of the 2 million um, who just live in essentially abject poverty until there can be a deal done for reconstruction, which would inevitably involve countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
You mentioned, I think the words you used was that Donald Trump blurted this out on Air Force One. It wasn't sort of an official policy prior to that point. Assuming it is genuinely what he wants, after having think about it, after the dust has settled, what is in it for Donald Trump? Why would this be, the end of decades of US foreign policy of, we want a two-state solution to sort this issue out, this long-term issue out?
Um, I think there's various elements to it. I mean, I think the way that the announcement was made, there was a good deal of kind of grandstanding and chest thumping about setting out his position. And I think, um, I mean, you almost look at it like the art of the deal, to quote Trump. I mean, the man he's hired, or he's appointed to be his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's a kind of a business friend of his from the 90s. I mean, the way they're approaching this is sort of like a business negotiation, and so neither of them can afford to lose, which is essentially why the deal was done. Essentially, money talked. Trump has, long-standing both personal and political involvement with Israel. He doesn't have much invested in seeing the kind of a two-state solution or the Palestinian ambitions of self-actualization. So, and he's made that very clear with the people that he surrounded himself with. I mean, if this wasn't something that he wanted, he would have hired very, very different people.
Do you think there is any possibility that when Donald Trump said this, he did not mean what we've all read into it, which is the end of any chance of a two-state solution? Do you think there's any chance he meant, you know, it's physically impossible to rebuild with all these people here. We need to rebuild for them, and then they will be invited back into a wonderful rebuilt Gaza for Palestinian people. Is that at all a possibility?
I think that would be Benjamin Netanyahu's worst nightmare. I mean, some say that he had an end goal of making Gaza essentially unlivable, which it is. I mean, 90% of people are displaced within Gaza. Many of them don't have a roof over their head. They're living in tents. The reconstruction of Gaza, once it begins, and we have no idea when it will begin, will take, under conservative estimates, will take years, if not decades, to do. I mean, we're looking at how slowly it's happening in places like Mosul and Iraq and Syria after their wars. And I mean, what you've seen from these images over the last week since the truce have been a kind of a very resilient, dedicated people. So, the north has now been reopened as of a day or two ago, and you see these images of people returning to essentially rubble. And they're there to say we're here to stay, and we're eking out a life in the midst of this kind of unlivable situation. I mean, Netanyahu I don't think would ever allow a situation where they were kind of Gaza was built back better, as you were. I mean, he may have, the most modest of his intentions might be to take the kind of waterfront area of Gaza and repopulate it with Israeli settlers. But I think if you have a US administration that's very sympathetic to Netanyahu, and that's his stated goal, I mean, I can't imagine that we're going to see a kind of brighter, cleaner, better built Gaza in the future.
Yeah, make Gaza great again, I think would be the phrase that I was thinking. Yeah, at the risk, I guess, of antagonising the vast majority who are infuriated by this. Um, Certainly, one of Netanyahu's sort of more right wing members of his cabinet, sort of suggested, look, there's hundreds of thousands of homeless Gazans. Where on earth are they going to go if they're not helped out by another country? Um, I guess, firstly, from your journalistic point of view, is there an answer to that? And secondly, is that at all anything that matters to the Gazans, or is it just about, as you say, we will build back here because this is where we belong?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen members of Netanyahu's kind of more extreme right part of his coalition, like Finance Minister Smotrich, celebrating Trump's comments, and essentially saying that Gazans would have a better life elsewhere. Is there a reality in that truth now? Probably. But, Egypt's Sinai Desert is not a great place to live by any means. And, Palestinians who are kind of second, third, fourth generation in Jordan, they're given citizenship now, but it's a tough life. And I mean, as I've said, there is a dedication for Gazans not to leave because they've seen through history, they've seen through the Nakba, or the catastrophe as they call it in Arabic, what it means to leave, even if it's kind of sold to them as a temporary move. I mean, they understand through history and through promises that have been made that essentially that there is no guarantee that will happen. So I think that there will be a huge reluctance for any of them to leave for any amount of time. I mean, maybe you could convince a small portion of them that they could have a better life somewhere else. But I mean, that's not, I don't think that speaks to the majority of Gazans.
I just, Josie, want to ask one more question, and it's sort of away from Gaza specifically, and a bit about the sort of domestic scene with regards to this. I mean, some of Trump's own Republican Party was sort of caught unawares, I think, by this, weren't they? And some have even gone public and gone, either this isn't practical, or I don't even believe in it, which is a little bit stronger. I wonder how much of a test this is of his actual power over the party, which we've seen and believed for so long is absolute. And I guess how he reacts to those that do publicly say something against this might give us an insight into sort of how free Republicans are to have their own beliefs, their own potentially non-Trumpian beliefs.
I think it's interesting what sort of Republicans and supposed allies of Trump decide to criticize publicly. I think Israel is a little bit more acceptable, say, or foreign policy is a bit more acceptable. Some of the other ideas of what's going on, particularly sensitive issues at home domestically. So if you look at kind of immigration policy, I think people will steer clear of that, but maybe feel free to talk about their opinions on what's happening in Israel. So we obviously saw Lindsey Graham, a kind of long-term Trump ally and senator for South Carolina, speak out about it, saying that he thought it would be hugely impractical, and would Arab countries even want to take these people in? I think it's already very clear who is in control of that party, and I don't think Trump needs to do very much more to project that strength. But I mean, that's certainly what he's doing in Israel, and woe betide anyone that kind of tries to get in the way of that ambition. So I think he might see it as a bit of a pest to have to deal with criticism from his own party, but I don't think it really touches him much.